end without thank yous. First of all, thank you to Majors and Quinn because they have really kept the literary life going all through COVID. I know it's a lot to ask people to come out with masks and be here tonight, but I do so appreciate it. And they need to get people back in the bookstores, and we're so lucky to have this jewel of a bookstore. So thank you to Majors and Quinn. My writer friends are here tonight, and I'm so lucky to have two writers groups that are just the inspiration to keep going in this very difficult world of writing. So I just want to call them out. Pat is an amazing writer. Carla couldn't be here tonight. Julia, can you just wave? Singer, an amazing poet. Allison, is right here taking pictures. Also an amazing poet. And Marcia Peck over there, who writes about music and amazing poetry and stories. And I also have another group that is wonderful, and Annie and Judith Katz just came in. Judith is moderating the next reading at Red Balloon, so I'm very grateful to that. And they're both so supportive and amazing writers, so thank you all for being here. I have many friends here. You're all my friends. That's why you came. And I just can't tell you what it means. Last year I didn't get to do this, and it just felt like a little blip when you have a book come out that you put so much work into. So you've all been very patient with my boundaries around work time, and it means a lot that you're here to celebrate with me tonight, so thank you. I couldn't do a reading without thanking Jack. He got me into YA, and as you all know, passionate about children's literature, YA literature, and he always said it's an amazing genre, and he inspired me to write YA books. So, and last but not least, I want to thank Tess, who is here, and her aunt, Carol Boschka, who couldn't be here tonight. They both cooked the most amazing dessert platter over there as a gift to me, and make sure you take some, even if you're not staying, make sure you take a couple because it's a real gift. And Tessa brought Sasha, who's a budding writer, and I'm so happy to have a couple of teens here. So thank you both for being here. Okay, it's all yours. Sorry.
Well, it's my absolute honor to be here and be asked to ask you questions about this amazing book. And I would just like to share, I've known Carol Dines now 10 years, and since a lot of you are friends, you know how passionate she is about dogs. And I should say that it was dogs that ultimately brought Carol Dines together in our writing group and introduced me to Carol. And it was Julia Kletzinger, the poet, who is also known as Mrs. Otis to the dog catcher. Otis and Vinny met each other at the dog park, and Julia and Carol met, and Julia was just so bowled over, oh my God, I met the most amazing woman at the dog park. So I just feel grateful to Otis and Vinny for making it possible for me to have you in my life. And you are such an amazing writer. I feel like sitting next to you like you're the real writer, you know? I mean, listening to that bio stuff, I was like, Judy Blume! Wow, right? Come on. And because I know Carol in writing group, she's just she's such a craftsperson in her work. She puts so much into it in terms of what she's reading, the time she puts into it, the thought that goes into all of her work, and her curiosity about the world. It's just such an amazing gift. And shitty first draft and you can be cool with that and move on. This woman does not have a shitty first draft. She really doesn't. I always say, well, you could move that paragraph or that sentence could go, but you know, it's kind of unreal how amazing your writing is. So it's very compelling work. And when I read it, I feel very engaged in the text. I think you're always asking such good questions of the reader that we're, almost all of your work, we come to the end and it's sort of like you turn the question around to the reader now, what do you think? You know? So I'm so excited about this particular book because it's, of course, in that vein, but one of the books that I think would be just an amazing book club read to have a conversation around. So I'm really excited about being here today to talk about it a little bit. So we're in for a real treat to have you do some reading and talking about this book. So would you like to get started?
Sure.
Sharing a passage.
Okay. And I sort of would like to use a mic because I lose my voice a lot. And can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me like this? Okay. The first passage, so I'm going to first tell you a little bit about the characters. This is the story of two 14-year-old teenagers who meet the second day of high school. They're both lonely. Frances has lost her best friend to the suburbs and was dumped afterwards after a friend moved to the suburbs. And Sonia has just moved from Europe where she's lived in Paris and announces she's lived in 11 cities and is quite worldly. They meet and then it's one of those bonds where they just click right away. They come from very different families. Frances comes from a family, she's the youngest of 3 children. Her sister's at Oberlin. Her brother's a soccer star at Southwest. It's all right here in Uptown. So, and Frances is a little bit of an introvert, shy, very creative. Her mom is a counselor at Wellstone School for Refugees, and her dad is a musician who has struggled with bipolar disorder and quit performing, touring, so that he's the stay-at-home dad. Sonia has moved here with her mom. Her parents are going through a very ugly divorce. She comes from a lot of money, lives in a big mansion on Lake of the Isles, and is quite embarrassed about it. So that's just a little backdrop going into the story, and I'm going to read you a scene. So they meet, and Sonia immediately the first weekend invites herself over for dinner. Says my mom has a thing, and I'm not able to stay alone. So could I stay at your house? And it's kind of the beginning of her staying at Frances's house a lot. And she woos the family. She's got a very adult sense of humor, and they love her. And I'm going to pick it up right in the middle of the dinner. Just a second. I'm going to read little short scenes. So this is, the narrator is Frances. As I stared at my family now, imagining us through Sonia's eyes, I realized that we were a family that talked a lot. And Sonia fit right in, a perfect fit really. She loved words and she loved conversations. Sonia and I have a great idea for homecoming. I glanced between mom and dad to make sure they were listening. Maybe we could paint your old band bus with poems, Dad. We'd make the world's first poetry mobile. Unsexy float, my brother mocked. Dad nodded. Sure. We can, Sonia asked. Seriously? Absolutely. Wait a minute. Mom set down her fork. Shouldn't we have a discussion about this before we decide? Dad kept nodding. It's just sitting there. Mom, I pleaded, you wanted me to get involved in some high school activity. That's not the point, she said. Please, I asked. Please, Sonia echoed. Mom stared at me, her chest heaving a sigh. All right, but I want to be here, and I'll set the hours, and you have to make sure everyone stays until the mess is cleaned up each night. Sonia was bouncing up and down. Thank you so much. Will flashed his dimple. If you insist, I'll drive it for you. That's when I knew it was a great idea. Even Will wanted in on it. But right there, right in the middle of our Friday night dinner, Sonia said, "This is how I've always imagined a family dinner should be. May I ask you all a question?" "Of course," Dad said. "I'd like to know what you would do if your father was having an affair with a 29-year-old. Mom glanced at Dad. Will's mouth dropped open. I stopped chewing. What? I stared at Sonia. She hadn't said a word to me. Guess where he was on my 15th birthday? Paris, with her, which is why he bought me these ugly but expensive glasses. He was trying to buy my forgiveness. He lied to me. He said it was business. He doesn't know I know." Sonia's eyebrows rose as she glanced around the table. Should I play dumb? Mom did her motherly thing and reached over and placed her hand on Sonia's wrist. What a difficult situation. Does your mother know? She cries all the time, Sonia said. She tells me he's having a midlife crisis. Let your parents sort it out, Dad said. How old is your dad? Will asked. 52. Sonia shifted her gaze to Dad. Could you fall in love with someone 20 years younger? Probably not, Dad said, but nobody can judge another person's marriage. What's your father do? Mom asked. He sells medical equipment to poor countries. Sonia took a deep breath. He says he's filling a necessary niche in developing countries, but my aunt calls him the criminal. Let your parents figure it out, Sonia, Mom advised. I felt angry, like a napkin soaking up a spill, Sonia's spill. She'd bypassed our friendship and gotten right into the center of my family with her problems. Why hadn't she mentioned it to me first? Only afterward, when we were deciding what to watch on television, and I kept saying, it's your choice, you're the guest, did Sonia turn down the volume. What's wrong, she asked. Nothing. Obviously, you're mad at me. I didn't respond. I turned the channel to The Voice and pretended to watch. Quiet Frances, she whispered, the easy one. That's Frances's nickname in her family. I registered her tone, a chilly tone, a superior tone. Was she mocking me, teasing me? My sister sometimes used a similar tone, as if to goad me to stand up for myself. I waited until we were in bed side by side, and Sonia let out a deep breath. My, you're a tad on the quiet side tonight. I blurted, you should have told me. You should have told me about your father's girlfriend before you told my family. It was humiliating not to hear first. I'm going to stop there.
Wow, right? So that kind of oversharing and pushing is something that is a hallmark of this friendship. And just teen friendships interest me too, because often they start very quickly and they become intimate and intense very fast, which is the trajectory of Sonia and Fran. And as we go through the book, you know, their lives become much more entwined to the point where it seems like who starts and who ends, you know. So in the book, when we think about these friendships, especially theirs, do you think this is a problem in teen relationships, and how does this show up?
I do think it's a problem, and I wanted to write this because I think most teens don't want boundaries. They want to cross boundaries. They want intense friendships outside the family. And in fact, I would say most teens that I know, and I was this way when I was younger, I equated a close, deep friendship with not having any boundaries. I would do anything for my friends. So I wanted to write about it because I think that's why it's very easy as a teen to get into a friendship where the boundaries get confused between lives. And in the case of this story, there are three areas that we see almost immediately. Disclosure is one boundary. So Sonia tells her whole life to everyone. She's out there. She's courageous. Whereas Frances is much more private. She holds her father's secret about his bipolar disorder. He's asked the family not to talk about it. So she doesn't tell Sonia, which comes up later in the book. So one boundary is disclosure. They have very different boundaries around that. The second is time. Sonia wants to spend all her time at Frances's house. And at the beginning, Frances loves it. It's like having a new sister. And she just, she feels that they're just so close. But when her sister comes home for Thanksgiving, she wants to spend time alone with her sister, and Frances begins to feel betrayed by that. So the second boundary, I would say, is around time. And the third boundary that gets crossed a lot in this friendship is need. Sonia is coming from a family that offers very little support. Fran has a lot of support at home. And so Sonia's bringing a lot of need to the friendship. And she is in love with Fran's family. She loves Fran, but she also loves Fran's family and Fran's brother. She develops a huge crush on the brother, and she pretty much would like to be there all the time. So her loneliness in her own family is really brought into this friendship and put on Frances.
So, yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about this book too is just how you have empathy for Sonia and her neediness and all of the things that are impacting her life. And you start to ask yourself, at what point does that cross the line? At what point is that not right, you know?
The
So,
empathy?
just in terms of
Sonia's
behavior in terms of the relationship with her friends. So, and I think, you know, one of the important things about friendships, teen friendships in particular, is the sense of belonging. And I think initially there's a deep sense of, oh, you're the one, you know? And discovering who you are in relationship with other people, I think, is another important aspect of teen friendship. And that's a theme in this book
It
as
is.
well.
So Sonia sees in Fran the family she wants and the creativity, but Frances sees in Sonia her worldliness, her humor. She is constantly sort of making jokes, and she's pretty brilliant in her understanding of the world. So they both look at each other and want what the other has.
Yeah, they really do. And so, you know, they're discovering themselves in their relationship. And then this is also an especially important aspect as we learn that both Sonia and Fran's parents have some mental health struggles. So there's some pretty unforgettable scenes in your book that share these complexities. So I was wondering if you could share one of those with us.
Yes, I would be glad to. So, as I said, Frances's father suffers bipolar disorder. And in the first part of the book, he is in a manic phase. And it's spiraling out of control. You need to know two things. One, Frances loves dogs, and she has two dogs, Vinny and Raven. They come up in this. And Sonia's in Florida for Christmas. So she's spending a lot of time with her father. And as I said, it's beginning, his manic phase is beginning to really escalate. Okay, I'm losing my voice, so I gotta.
Here's some more water.
Oh, thank you. I've been taking voice lessons, so I may have to up it so I don't go down. Yeah. Okay. On Christmas Eve, we always invited Mom's cousins, JJ and Kirsten, and their 6-year-old son, Leaf, who adored Will. They dressed alike, turtlenecks, hand-knit sweaters, khakis, and merrills. JJ was 10 years younger than Mom, but he looked just like her. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed. Kirsten was tiny, with hair the color of clothespins and a long face. They had both become religious after they met in treatment years before. And now they were both counselors for drug-addicted teenagers. At one point, Kirsten was describing the opioid problem in Hinckley, where they lived, an hour north of Minneapolis. We see a lot more burglaries now, she said, and it's mostly drug-related. People are desperate. Leaf was a small, quiet boy with wide ears, gray eyes, and short-cropped blonde hair. As his mother talked, he unconsciously lowered his hand to his crotch. "Do you need to use the bathroom?" Kirsten asked him. Leaf shook his head, but he kept scratching. Kirsten grew stern. "Then leave your little man alone." "That's his penis," Dad said. Leaf burst into giggles. "You're not supposed to use that word." "Penis?" Dad looked at Kirsten. "Is there something in the Bible against using the word penis?" "I think not." He turned back to Leaf. "I use penis all the time. In fact," Dad grinned, "it's a wonderful penis Christmas, isn't it?" Allie glared at Mom. "Why do you let him do this?" "What?" Dad laughed. "Start a penis conversation?" Kirsten reached over and put her hand on Leaf's arm. "Uncle William is just being silly." "Silly penis me," Dad whispered to Leaf. "Penis Uncle William," Leaf giggled uncontrollably. "Penis presents, penis napkin, penis everything." I laughed, Will laughed, even JJ smiled. Kirsten, Mom, and Allie glared at Dad. Very soon, Kirsten, JJ, and Leaf left, and we all helped Mom clear and stack the dishes in the dishwasher. Dad went outside to walk the dogs. No one said a word until Mom held a dish towel to her face. "Go upstairs, please, all of you." She didn't want us to see her crying. Allie hugged her until Mom gently pushed her back. "Go. I need to talk to your father when he comes inside." I went upstairs and got into bed. We were a different family now. We listened harder, stared harder, but spoke our truths less. I wondered if we'd always been this way, so separate, or if now that I was older, I was seeing the truth of my family for the first time, pieces instead of a whole. In my mind, I tried to draw a line around us. I tried to hold us all together inside the line. But more and more, I felt the line had been broken. And instead of a circle, we were dots, scattered separately. I heard a scratch on my door, and when I opened it, Vinny jumped on my bed. I lay awake, feeling his breath on my ankle. I wondered if he could smell the future, if he knew why the silences inside our family had turned so heavy.
I think that's such an amazing scene. It's hilarious. I will never think of Christmas. Honestly, penis Christmas is coming. Just kidding. Anyway, but then, when Fran says, "I was seeing the truth of my family for the first time and I wanted to draw a line around us," that was so touching, so insightful, and so heartbreaking, that she's having this realization, and that's just the beauty of that scene. So the question that I have for you around it is, knowing that these two characters have mental illness in their lives, and it's reflected in their friendships, it's in the relationship with Fran and her father. Just talk more about how that impacts their relationships and the nature of friendship.
Okay, so Sonia's family's life is very chaotic at home. And I think that it impacts her. Her parents aren't there for her. Her mom's deeply depressed over the divorce, doesn't want the divorce, and is drinking heavily. And so Sonia's way of dealing with her mother's depression is to really try to control everything in her friendships. She comes out of that spillover into her life as extremely controlling. She wants, when she meets Fran, she goes, she tries to set premises. So what's the first premise of our friendship? No secrets. And she tries to control it by having rules. Fran, on the other hand, in her relationship with her father calls her his ally in the relationship, because they write in their journals together, they do music together, and they're very close. Whereas the siblings, the older siblings, are angry with the father that he's not getting more help, and they've distanced themselves. But Fran, he considers and calls Fran his ally in the family. So she has really adopted a caretaking role and puts his feelings ahead of herself. And that begins to happen in her friendship with Sonia too. As Sonia begins to disintegrate, she has a major crisis in her family. And Fran then begins to take care of her feelings over her own feelings and over her own needs. And so that's how, so I think there's different, I wanted to kind of demonstrate how, I think most families have, if not mental illness, addiction, something that we're all dealing with, and it does impact us. But I wanted to show two different ways that it had impacted. And the way it comes up in their friendship is Sonia's more controlling in her friendship, and Frances is more accommodating because she's learned to do that with her father.
Yeah, and I think, the question of how to have a close friendship or relationship and not lose your sense of self is such a critical consideration in this book. So I wanted to know if you could share a passage about that.
So I'm going to go back before Christmas, when things are beginning to really get mixed up in their friendship. They're starting to feel a little tension. Josh is Frances's childhood friend. She loves him, and Sonia can't stand him. And he's a really good guy. He's a little corny, makes really kind of immature jokes, but Frances is very loyal to him. And he has a party. It's the first snow party outside. They go, and she invites Sonia with her. She knows that Josh would like to be romantic with her, but she wants to keep it just friends. And at the party, Josh turns his attention to Stevie, another friend. And so this is Sonia comes back and sleeps over at Frances, and this is their conversation. Frances narrates the whole book. Right after I turned out the lights, Sonia whispered, "Stevie and Josh, aren't you relieved?" I hadn't spoken the whole way home, and I didn't answer now. I was trying to figure out my own feelings. I didn't feel relieved at all. I felt easily replaced. It had taken less than a day for Josh to shift his feelings to someone else, just like it took one day for Lindsay to stop all communication after she moved to the suburbs. What did that say about me? You could have had him. Sonia nestled under the covers on her side. You probably still could if that's what you want. It's not, I mumbled. I didn't want to talk about it. As we lay there in the dark, I could hear Sonia breathing loudly. Can I just say one thing? She turned to face me in the dark. Tonight at the party, you didn't care if I froze or felt out of place. And you know what really gets me? We had a plan for me to sleep over, and you were just willing to cancel so you could stay and flirt with Josh, even though you don't really want Josh. You just don't want anyone else to have him either. Maybe it's the same with me. You want a best friend, but you don't want to work at being a best friend. I lay completely still. Her words felt a little bit true, but not entirely true. I was not a person who knew immediately what I felt. I needed to sort my feelings like lights and darks in the laundry basket. I was making piles in my mind, Sonia's perspective and my perspective. Even now, she said, I have no idea what you're thinking. I'm thinking about what you just said, I told her. Sonia sat up, her foot pressing into my hip. Can I be honest? You always try to be so nice, but really you hide behind nice. You're actually very passive-aggressive. Sweet little Frances Tannen, easy one. Underneath, control freak. I was so stung by her words, I couldn't think of anything to say. Besides, I wasn't sure what passive-aggressive meant. See, you control by going silent, she told me. I couldn't listen to her anymore. I was sick of everyone. Sick of Josh's insincere wish to be my boyfriend. Sick of Sonia's words. Sick of my brother's put-me-downs and my know-it-all sister's advice. Sick of my mother's post-its and my father's mood swings. Sick of the tension in our house. Mostly I was sick of my life. I felt everyone took a piece of me, and there was nothing left over for myself. Fine, Sonia pulled out her cell. I'll go home then. I listened as she called her mother to come pick her up. I'm not feeling well, she said. No, I can't stay here. Then she gathered her things into her backpack and left. I was relieved when the door shut behind her. I needed time to think. 5 minutes later, I heard a tap at my window. I looked out to see Sonia lobbing her mittens against the glass. She'd pulled on her boots and wore a hooded jacket over her pajamas. I went downstairs and opened the back door. She stood crying in the fresh snow. I had never seen Sonia cry. She lost her beauty when she cried. Her face pinched around the nose and her eyes swelled. I glanced at the empty street. Isn't your mom coming? She shook her head. My mother would never come pick me up at this hour. She's passed out in bed. Her eyelashes glistened from tears. I faked the call. We stood outside, the ground covered in a layer of white. It was so quiet, winter quiet. I could hear both of us breathe little puffs of hot air coming out of our mouths. I glanced up at the moon and stars. I couldn't tell if the brightest star was a satellite or real. Light years away if it was a real star. I always felt a little lost when I thought about time that way. A different kind of lost, as if nothing at this moment in time really mattered in the context of star time. And in some strange way, that was the great leveler, distances that made loneliness seem irrelevant. I felt a little freer. I moved back inside and nodded for Sonia to come too. When we climbed into bed, she whispered, I didn't think you'd let me leave. I thought you wanted to leave, I told her. You are very pretty when you're angry, she told me. You should get very angry at Gravy. That's who she has a crush on. I didn't laugh. I didn't want her turning my feelings into a joke. I wanted her to hear me, my words and my silence. Are we okay? She reached over and patted my arm. We got through our first tiff. I smiled at the word tiff.
Yeah. That's such a powerful scene in terms of how they fight and come back together. And I think there's so much about it that also feels natural, which is another one of the reasons why I think this book is just such a conversation starter about the nature of friendship. So clearly the girls, they aired some grievances and they had disappointments that they shared with each other. And, you know, throughout the book, Frances starts to distance herself from Sonia. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the nature of disappointment in friendship and how that's managed.
So I wanted to write this book because I don't think we talk enough about why friendships end. And one of the most painful experiences for me was having to end a very, very close friendship. And so one of the things I've learned since then, and I've been thinking about, is I think in all friendships there's disappointment because our boundaries with each other change over time. They're always changing. If somebody has a lot going on in their life and they can't meet their friends' expectations, there's disappointment. If somebody has more time, if one friend has more time than the other to spend together and prioritize the friendship, there's disappointment. So I wanted to really create this in their friendship as Sonia's mother attempts to get suicide New Year's Eve. And she moves in with Frances's family, and it's a turning point because Frances hasn't really realized she does need time alone. And she begins to distance herself, and Sonia is very hurt by it. She is very disappointed that Frances, in her time of need, is beginning to draw boundaries. Frances is disappointed in Sonia that she can't understand why. Sonia's such a big personality. Frances feels it's swallowing her up in the friendship. So there's disappointment on both sides. And I think one of the things that I would love to talk to teens about is the idea that, you know, you're gonna be disappointed in friendships. Not all the time, but there are gonna be moments of disappointment. There are gonna be moments when a friend doesn't live up to your expectations. And I know, for instance, I'll just use myself. With aging parents, grandchildren, I've had to say to some of my friends, I'm not there as much as I wanna be. And I wish I could be. But a lot of teens don't really know how to communicate about that. A lot of us learn that later on in life, that we have to sort of speak to the disappointment and discuss it. So I wanted to write about how disappointment isn't just a momentary thing in their friendship. It becomes the pattern in their friendship, and that's when it really becomes dangerous. And further on, Sonia really is so upset, and she said she's considering ending the friendship at one point. She says, sometimes endings are easier than disappointment. And I'm not going to tell you where it goes from there, but in any case, I wanted to just mine that idea.
Yeah, the book comes to a really dramatic and stunning conclusion. So you'll definitely, I don't want to say what it is, but you definitely need to read this book. So given that, and I've had the opportunity to ask you my questions, but I'd like to open it up to people here to ask Carol questions.
No questions?
I have an observation that I absolutely love, that you went to the most tender time in people's lives, where you test affection, you know, in such a deep and intense interaction. You really test the boundaries of yourself and what you can do with another person. There is this amazing excitement that with this other person you can do. And then, like you're saying, it's easier to fade than to face a change. I love that you deal with this. And it's a very complicated, layered, emotional moment. I'm really moved that you did that. I still have friends from my childhood in Italy, and not childhood, I mean teen years, and we still talk like those times are now gone, because there is a dynamic there that is unbelievable, and it doesn't reproduce itself.
Right.
Because then you have, you know, spouses, kids, something. There is a little layer, and back then, nothing.
Those adolescent friendships are very special.
Yeah. Totally.
And one of my adolescent friends is there.
Oh,
60
wonderful.
years we've had a
Wow.
friendship. That's
Wow.
pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So. Any other questions? Yeah, Pat?
So, have any young adults read the book, and have you shared it with them, and any kinds of discussion around?
Yes, because it's a whole new world out there in social media, and I hired a publicist who specializes in young adult books. So she actually has, some of her reviewers have book clubs with like 40,000 people in them. And they are, I mean, it just kind of, it's such a different world. But so they did review the book, and they have discussions online, and it's something I wouldn't even know how to access. But Sasha, have you read it yet, or you?
I'm about halfway through.
Okay. Yeah, so I'd love to, when you're done, I'd love to hear your insight sites. I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but no, I'd love to do more. I'd love to have more teens at discussions with teens about this. I did a guide to go with the book if it's used in classrooms, and unfortunately, I didn't read the publisher's fine print, which said it has to be in at a certain date, so it didn't go into the book. But if I'm invited to schools, I would definitely use that. But, yeah, Miriam.
Why did you decide to set the book in Minneapolis? And is it, of all your books, the most set here?
I think so. Well, one reason is I wanted to put them, the two teens, at a big high school like Southwest, where it's diverse. And they're both lonely when they enter it. They get there the first day. And I do like to write about something I know and places I've been to. My short stories are all over, but in this book I felt that there's so much in this area. It's urban. There's a lot going on. The lakes play a role. A lot of their friendship happens along the lakes. And they ski across the lakes in the winter. So that was just, I don't know, it was just important to me to have it in a very familiar place, be able to share that. Any other questions? Oh, Linda.
So the book is from the point of view of Frances. Did you consider a third person narration, or possibly the point of view of Sonia? Sounds like it would have been a different book, or would it have?
I don't know, because Sonia has a very loud voice in this book. There's a lot of dialogue. And one of my challenges was to bring Sonia down a bit.